Okay, here we go. Let's do this. I'm just going to move this around a little bit and I don't know if that's all right. Okay. So for today's installment, we're going to talk about the adaptations in the seventh hub and specifically the shrinking and inflating adaptations. And so the seventh hub is the developmental stage of our nervous system that's related to like cognition, executive functioning, thinking, contemplation, understanding things. And so while that is developing in our nervous system, it's like, okay, so if we have been subjected to the interruptions and stressors, as discussed in the previous readings and on the previous pages, what are some of the ways that we adapt in order to basically survive? Like, so adaptation is really about surviving our current environment. And one of the specific things about this first cycle of development of all the seven hubs is that we're surviving in an environment that we can't really escape. So we can't leave and go to another family. We don't have any type of independence. And so adaptation is really really an outcropping of being stuck in something. And so as adults, that happens where, we start to adapt because of, jobs, marriages, relationships, continuation of social constructs. But the idea is that it's like when we're in the situation, we can't change it. So we change ourselves in order to make it actually like tolerable, comfortable, or survivable. So here, what we're looking at is, and the thing is why this part 2 here is focused on this first cycle of development is that there's no context. So we're just kind of adapting without, or even what we're developing right here, which is like the capacity for consciousness, that in the first 7 hubs in their initial development, that it's literally just kind of an on the fly thing that has to do with the resources available and our natural, like, sort of arising inclinations. So we work with whatever materials we have available to us, and the fact that we adapt is extraordinary. It's really the thing. The thing is, like, the fact that these adaptations, these behaviors that are kind of where we're constricting or overcompensating parts of ourselves to survive a situation, is this beautiful thing that gets bastardized, because it's like once the adaptations, especially when they're formed in kind of the wet clay of our early lives, once those adaptations are kind of outlived, like we leave a situation, like we leave our, where we grew up, or we, whatever, and we still have these behaviors that they can be vilified, like, these qualities about ourselves we don't like, and without consciousness and care about the genesis, the arising of them being probably some of the most loving organic acts that sort of come out of our being, which is being able to survive and live through and make the best. It's making the best of a situation. That these are evidence of the depth of your ability to survive and make it through impossible situations. So don't pile on top of it the exhaustion of making it through a difficult situation with the notion of that your behavior, like that you're, this kind of, cruel judgment of oneself in terms of like what are the outcropping or the outcomes in terms of like some of the behavior patterns that get stuck in us. So, okay. So that's enough of that's kind of where I'll go with just a reminder of what adaptations are, is that we're looking for the behaviors in ourselves here that are connected with the initial development. So we're tracing back to the root. We're looking back to say, okay, what are, like in terms of understanding this particular hub within ourselves, is to say, okay, well, like, Where am I at with this? And so one of the so, directionally, the 2 primary, like, directions of adaptation are to either make yourself smaller or make yourself bigger. So, and this is again, in the second chapter, if you want to reference back to that, into the second chapter of the book in part 1, it gets more into inflating voltage and even like how these get formed. Is that one, so one adaptation is to make something appear like believe it has less needs, and the other is to overcompensate and almost like be louder and bigger. Like, so they're both protections. One is a protection to be like, you know what, actually, I actually don't need that much. And the other is a protection that is like bellowing. Like it's self-protection through becoming, yeah, I mean, just like it's kind of obvious. So like one of the examples of this is that it's like, if your kid on a playground who gets picked on, who gets bullied, severely one day, and it's kind of, or like there's a couple of school age examples I can use. And one is that it's like, okay, well, so the next day, you're nervous about like the next recess, right? And so it's like going, that night, it's like, what's your strategy? Is your strategy that it's like to shrink is to the shrinking, and these are both like I know there's kind of a tendency to be like there's one that's better than the other, but it's like you work with the resources that you have. So if you don't have a big brother, if you don't have the people that you can call on, if you don't have, people who believe you, if you don't have social supports, um, you know, the thing of like hiding and like maybe I'm gonna eat, I'm gonna like do homework in the classroom, or I'm gonna go to the nurse, or I'm gonna do something where I'm gonna, protect myself by kind of becoming smaller and hiding. Or it's like you enroll your older brother or older sibling and friends, and and the next day at recess you show up and you have, or maybe like, in a time collapsed universe, like you go home and you like work out and you practice fighting, and you come back and you're stronger and bigger and you have more people and you're more ferocious. And that, like, a lot of that just has to do with the resources and the sort of the like some, of course some other aspects of like our natural disposition, another, and a lot of it has to do with how much energy you have. So when it comes to actually developing an adaptation, it has to do much with how young you are and how much actual like energy you have to actually develop a strategy that has more power behind it. Or if you're really in the early stages of the development of the hub, shrinking is such an advantageous strategy because it doesn't require energy, and then inflating requires a lot of energy. So, and another example is just like a test. It's like if you fail a test, it's like, do you go and like, study, exhaust yourself in studying, or do you just say, you know what, there's no point? Both of them have to do with how much energy you have. And one of them is considered like the morally superior, um, incorrectly, I'll say, but it's like, how do you protect yourself against that situation? So we're talking about the 2 different adaptations, shrinking and inflating, as they relate to the development of our cognition. And this is late adolescence, early adulthood. And so yesterday I actually didn't do a reading because I had a really evocative personal practice on this, where a lot was, kind of surfaced in me about this period of my life. So I was really integrating that. So, this is going to be, it's the last year. It's kind of the last years in high school, but I would actually point to the first collegiate year, like 2021 is like 20 into this kind of like the first. sort of dipping the toe into adulthood, especially when it's kind of like, it's not fully formed. So it's like whatever it is, like whatever relationships that you have. And one of the things about this stage is that oftentimes what's going to be happening is you're bringing your context of how you came up in the world within your family to whatever level, like that family prepared you to believe how people are in the world and what it's like to function in friendships and intimate relationships, and with roommates, with partners, boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever, that you bring that into the world. And in many ways, it's your first kind of rude awakening of people reacting to who you are in terms of your conditioning from this first phase of, like the first round, the first development. And so the thing I'm going to point to here is that what happens is that in this next phase, and those are also in part 1 of the book, the first phase of development that we focus on here in part 2 is the context. And then each sequential phase, we actually get the chance to consciously reclaim and do like and like get into a process of actually shaping ourselves. And that's what Parinama method is all about. But anyway, so the first, and this is one of the things where that can be a particularly rude awakening when you talk about adaptations, which is like behavior patterning. That's the result of like making the best of the situation of your primary caregivers and the home of your childhood and adolescence. And it's like, and then you bring it out into the world, and that's when you're kind of like, you get met with like sort of some, the reaction to that. And so that can be one of the things, especially when you're talking about like creating internal division, the sense of like, oh, there's something wrong with me. So it's like a doubling down of like, being sort of patterned and programmed this way. And then through just the roll of the dice of, life. And then you're coming out into the world and you're behaving in the way that put, that create that where the circumstances and the situations, like you actually like enact it. So that can be, that like that. And so that's part of what even the first phase in terms of the conscious reclamation and the 7th hub. So I'm going to stop talking about this because I'm starting to get like way more into the esotericness of this, which is not usually my intent, but what are we going to do? So, okay. So talking about the shrinking adaptation, once again, this is the one that's like, look, at this stage, you don't have the energy to like really like blast off. So in the 7th hub, so our relationship with what we believe in can become enmeshed with our sense of who we think we are. So again, our relationship with what we believe in can become enmeshed with our sense of who we think we are, who we think we belong with, and our sense of conviction or principle. When we adapt by shrinking, we can be protecting ourselves from what we perceive to be hostile and threatening information, or even the fear of being alienated by people we love if we have dissenting viewpoints. Yeah, that's real. The shrinking adaptation, this is real. Like something I'm going to point to here is this has layers. So the layers here are that the dissenting view, like what we're dissenting relative to, has layers. So it's like the people closest to us, then it's our social conditioning, then it's the cultural, then societal. Like it's interesting about like that notion. But anyway, the shrinking adaptation tends to discredit alternative viewpoints rapidly through dismissal, generalization, or even ridicule and distortion. This adaptation often adopts a position of certainty or expertise and will end or discourage further discussion, claiming to have already examined alternative perspectives. This is a protective defense, so it's not interested in feedback and or other thoughts unless they fall within narrow criteria. Being considered intelligent by someone with this adaptation has this single requirement of being in agreement. Neat, neat, neat. Yeah, this is, and the thing with this adaptation, and whether you have it, you can tell I'm like kind of talking. There's certain ones where I write where it's like very clear, like I'm talking about like othering people with this. But one of the things I would say with this particular adaptation is that there's like a real cosplay of in like intellect. So this is where you get someone who's very like intelligent and erudite. And so there might be the thing where it's like, oh, this is somebody that wants to have an intelligent discussion. They want to like, talk about, like hear new ideas. They'd be interested in that. They're intelligent. They like information. But this adaptation is no interest in information. It's actually like that kind of manifestation of being like highly intelligent is actually a defense of being infallible. So it's like, so when you're kind of like, hey, have you ever thought about it this way? And then you can see this like sort of darkening cloud of like, okay, this person is like, yeah, I mean, it's kinda like one of the things that comes to mind is like, that TV show, The Big Bang Theory, this idea of what intelligent people are is like this like is shrinking. It's like a shrinking Seventh Hub adaptation is literally like the stereotype of like what being intelligent is, which is being, like Frasier, being like really stuffy and, having these like kind of, elevated tastes and stuff, but it's like it's just this like really low dynamic, super repetitive, usually there's only intelligence and curiosity focused on a very like limited number of topics. So that's another thing about shrinking is like it's kind of an obsessiveness of like the expansion of one perspective. So it's like learning more and more about something that validates um, an existing perspective. So it's like this doubling down. I love that though. I'm going to read this again. This is a protective defense, so it's not interested in feedback and or others' thoughts unless they fall within narrow criteria. Being considered intelligent by someone with this adaptation has this single requirement of being in agreement. Both inflating and shrinking adaptations restrict their social access to only like-minded people. This is how extremely conservative and New Age spiritualists find common ground in conspiracy theories. Insular thinking leads to paranoia, self absorption, and alarming urgency in defending and validating existing beliefs. Shrinking intellectuals invest so much of themselves in providing a particular hypothesis or in strengthening a case that when faced with new information, they can't go to the old. They can't let go of the old. In some cases, these folks are initially delightful and intriguing, but eventually reveal they have a fixed catalog of thoughts and ideas that do not grow or change. So, characteristics of a shrinking seventh hub, you know, is like unimpressed, cynical, guarded, belief in limitations, either doesn't believe in God or practices a religion with excessive rigidity, serious personally, limited or absent sense of humor, in general not interested in learning new things outside of specific interests, vapid, dismissive, and controlling, know-it-all, weak attention span with anything other than its interests. So it's like really like honestly, it's like the very lush, organic, like kind of second hub level curiosity that's like sensuous, and it's like it's like that it sort of digs its hands in the dirt and has this kind of sense of wanting to understand beyond, like this is kind of like so we could okay, excessive skepticism. So this adaptation, so here's one of the things. This is an adaptation where it's like when you're bringing your perspective to the table, it's going to be really like you're really going to be like, "Oh shit, I'm going to have to defend myself." Like it's like, well, and when you're approaching someone with this adaptation, there really is the sense of like, "Oh, this is going to require that. Yeah, I'm ready to make my case and defend it." And the thing is that's not even gonna do anything typically, or it'll do very little. When somebody is not interested in understanding, they're not interested in understanding. So the all you can do oh, here, I'll give a little hint here. All you can do is try to meet them where they are. So here's a trick, and it's one of the things that makes people feel my approach is sometimes offensive, I'll be honest, is that I try to figure out why somebody thinks the way they think. So if I have someone with a shrinking adaptation in my life, I don't feel like this is my chance to be like, I'm going to show, because the thing about having your own perspective and expressing it in exactly the way that you wish to as being integrity, that's one interpretation of integrity. Another is like in terms of trying to reach somebody with your point is actually realizing like when they're shrunken and that like when they have this like shrunken adaptation, they're not meeting you where they are. They're talking at you through a wall. So or a force field. So I'm always interested in like what got you to this thinking? Like what are you what is it that this is securing for you? What is meaningful for you about this belief that we're countering? And where's a comment? Like, let me understand you more fully and let's like walk this back. And so I spend time kind of trying to consider that. And that's where I start with. I don't start with where I'm at. I start with like try. And so actually, I didn't do a good job of describing that. So that must be just that I'm not supposed to really talk too much about that. But yeah. It's really, like, instead of trying to create a conflict, which is actually just gonna fortify their position, um, it's creating simpatico in a sense, of being like, "Here's the stuff we agree on. Let's build off that. Let's build off respect." So and afraid of looking stupid. Like, the thing about there's this underlying insecurity about being stupid and not being smart, where it's like this this kind of oddly enough, almost like an overcompensation, but, um cannot tolerate being wrong. So it's like incredible dissonance if they feel like they've been perceived as wrong or incorrect. This is a huge thing, actually, really worth considering. It's like our own relationship with being incorrect and making mistakes and like getting it wrong and misunderstanding something. That's a real that's a place where shame lives in this hub. Is like intellectual insecurity, like, "I'm stupid, my ideas aren't good, I don't think I understand everything." It's like, well, you understand everything in the context of your own life and how it and, like, what you've been exposed to so far, and that's enough. That's enough to be able to come up with your own sensibility about a situation without being completely wed to the idea that it's like, "This is correct." Like, the idea that it's like, once it comes out of my mouth, it's correct is like, or that I have to defend it as like is like this sort of piece of myself that sort of lives indefinitely. So intelligent in quotes and knows a lot about specific subject matter within a particular parameter. I feel like that's kind of a repetition. So yeah, maybe you have this adaptation. I think, it's not uncommon. Um I would say one of the things about this adaptation too is that it's like you're either so the thing that's mentioned earlier is it's either people that are in agreement with you or people that you can subjugate. That you're like, that more about the topic on so that you can browbeat them, and they just and that's even considered to be, like, this advantage, like, you can't win an argument against me because I know more about something. This is something I'm really, like, try to be really vigilant about in myself, which is, like, not discounting somebody from having a discussion about something and not being curious about them because they're not as studied about something as I am. It's, like, such a miss to be like, "Oh, this won't be interesting." It's like, no, you're gonna have people are gonna have a perspective based on what they know that is going to hold resonance for them, and that's meaningful and worth respecting. You don't need to be as, like, studied as me, I'll use myself as an example. So, yeah, I don't think I'm a shrinking adaptation of the sub. Maybe that's why it's written from this very perspective of being frustrated by people who are. And frustrated by I think one of the things that's, like, the hurt that I see in this is this hope. You see somebody with, like, sort of a lot of interests in something, and you go, "Oh, this is gonna be really fun," and that's not fun. Like, that's the hurt. Like, I'm hurt by that. I get hurt by that. I get, like, interest in things they're interested in, and then it's like, "Oh, they're not interested in the things I'm interested in." Gosh. It hurts, It hurts. It feels sad. Okay, so inflating, the other adaptation. Let's talk about it. So I'm gonna mm, okay, here we are. So, all right. The intellectual certainty of the inflated adaptation can be both magnetic and a bit of a booby trap for folks seeking to grow in the seventh hub. The confident conviction exhibited in this adaptation can be fascinating and draw people in, especially those struggling with some of the big seventh hub topics like divinity and transcendent purpose. Excuse me. Even when inflated people are not particularly charismatic, they can have a mesmerizing effect on someone with underdeveloped intellectual confidence and capacity. There's an understandable temptation to bypass the hard work of inquiry, sidestepping nuance in exchange for easy answers that don't exist. Knowledge exists within paradox, and navigating this ambiguity is essential for a strong and dynamic seventh hub. Often obsessed and fixated with either building a following or acting as followers to a cult like leader for all types of obsessions, religious, dietary, lifestyle. Seventh hub inflators may even go no contact with non believers because they represent a threat that can't be tolerated. Strength in this hub involves intellectual tolerance for different perspectives and beliefs. This adaptation is the same regardless of how it's expressed, that is, expansive and unreceptive to new ideas. Think of a vegan who cannot tolerate the nutritional choices of others, or of a cult member who refuses their non participating children. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, one of the things, like, an idea like a vegan who's like, this is, it's the cruelty of eating meat. I was a vegan. So I was really connected to something that was very personal for me. But I remember other vegans were really terrible to people and guilting and shaming them. And also the idea that cruelty doesn't live within your food supply. I mean, there are people that are there's a lot of cruelty in, like, I'm not talking about, like, ripping vegetables and they're, like, from the ground, they're screaming. I'm talking about the people who, um, the migrant workers who, like, live as, who live as nomads, traveling, barely surviving in order to pick your food for you. People who work in factories preparing food. I mean, it's just not as simple. And if vegan is your choice, it's like, absolutely, like, that's it. Like, if that connects with you. But the idea, that anything is like absolutely like, it's like I've figured it out. I've figured out how to make the food I consume, non-harming. It's like by nature, your existence actually winds up, you know, causing a form of harm and taking. It's not. Like, I guess harm is a tough word for that. It's like there's just some, whatever. So anyway, yeah, I guess I can't finish that. I don't know how to wrap that up with a bow. So, and yet there is nuance here too. When someone disregards your perspective and the inherent humanity of living a non-harmful lifestyle different from its own, reducing exposure and enacting boundaries with it can be necessary. So some folks with the inflating adaptation will retell conspiracy theories with jaw-dropping conviction, discussing an issue as an exercise in dominating so-called opponents with no intent of hearing what they have to say. They are highly influenced by emotionally charged content and place an unrealistic emphasis on something feeling right, and therefore don't require investigation or inquiry to become enthusiastic believers. Research outside their bubble can be viewed as lack of faith because they tend to become frustrated with details. In general, this adaptation is disconnected from its body, even though they may be fixated and obsessed with physical disciplines like yoga and fitness. They don't tend to feel a lot and gravitate towards extremes, intellectually bypassing the importance of the body by ignoring it altogether or becoming obsessed with it. The late 20th century Indian mystic Osho, arguably a cult leader himself, said the believer does not want to seek. That's why he believes. He needs a savior, somebody who can eat for him, chew for him, digest for him. But if I eat, your hunger is not going to be satisfied. Nobody can save you except yourself. By the way, my editor wanted that out so badly because he's a creep, Osho. I just, I think it's like coming from a cult leader himself, like this thing where it's like, it's really, it's our work to do. I don't know. Like, I'm going to read these characteristics. I don't know how great these distinctions are. I'm going to be honest. I'm reading this and I'm like seeing and then inflating. I'm like, I don't really get how this is so different from the shrinking. But here we go. Enjoys being right and dominating people with opinions stated as facts. Employs subjugation and domination of others when it's easy, yet their beliefs have surprising fragility and are defended by blocking or cutting off non-believers. Obsessive, expansive, and fixated with manic excitement masquerading as wonder and awe. Understands with suspiciously little information, doesn't require credentials. Yeah, I think that's a really important one. This kind of thing where it's like this like emotionally led notion of understanding that, and that just like fills in all the interstices and like ends the process of inquiry. That it's just like, and then other people who don't just like believe without any type of, consideration. I mean, because the thing is like believing is, just sort of like that feels really right to me. It's like, okay, that's a place to start. But now let's kind of consider that there are a lot of forces in the world that will have us believing things that serve their interests. So it's really worth considering and doing your own work to discern what it is that feels right about it and to look for it to say like, okay, well, let me understand this a little bit more. So one of the things about the seventh hub is that we're like using our ability to think, to evaluate, to as like this like ability to just make better decisions, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Or just be aware of what we're doing when we're doing it instead of just being sort of led by this thing where it's like, oh, faith. And it's like, faith in what? Considers discernment and research a lack of faith. Yeah. Can be so lighthearted that they detach from reality, including the suffering they cause others. Oblivious to their obliviousness. Dissociated from the body despite being obsessed with it. These are actually pretty good. Often becomes manic when challenged. Oh, this one's good. These are good. I might reread these. Expansive and hyperbolic. Immediately buys into a new belief without requiring evidence or extensive information. So, yeah, so it's like understands with suspiciously little information, doesn't require credentials. It's like ripe for indoctrination. Considers discern, and indoctrination means that just you become a like a it's sort of like you become like a soldier puppet for whatever it is that you've been indoctrinated in. You're controlled by something outside of yourself. So considers discernment and research a lack of faith. Can be lighthearted. Can be so lighthearted that they detach from reality, including the suffering they cause others. I mean, this is something so new age here. Like don't look at the bad stuff, guys. Stay positive. And this actually, I'm gonna talk about this for a second. The don't look at the bad stuff has to do with the second hub, the restricted capacity to feel fully in the second hub. And I don't mean just feel bad things. I mean feel in terms of how the aperture grows to be able to see bad things and good things to greater voltage, and to be able to remain autonomous and not become absorbed in intense feelings. So this is something that's like to see something and not be able to, the way to deal with the fact that the feeling is really uncomfortable is not to like grow the capacity to be with uncomfortable feelings. It's to just say like, don't be negative. It's going to make me feel like shit. And it's like, yeah, feeling like shit, it can really be part of a practice of developing ourselves with the right tools and the right perspective. If we're not, like the whole thing is like we're trying to feel like shit without becoming absorbed by feeling like a piece of shit. So it's not that we're a piece of shit. It's that we're having a feeling, that our personhood is having this feeling that's terrible, and to expand our capacity to stand with, like, be with increasingly difficult levels of feeling and emotion, and expand that capacity. Oblivious to their obliviousness. Dissociated from the body despite being obsessed with it. So this is like where the body is like becomes separated and like almost like objectified. It's like an intellectual exercise versus an actual instrument for our experience of life and the reconnection with who and what we are. Often becomes manic when challenged. So this is like where you see like cognitive dissonance, and you see people become like really heightened when they're challenged. Their eyes become, like they're like, "Ah," and they're just really activated. Like a shrinking will like not become activated. They'll become, they'll sort of become very erudite. Inflating will become like very, and this is where you get all sorts of the kind of stuff where, they start becoming personal and like pulling things in that have nothing to do with the actual subject matter because they don't have a lot of information. They just start pulling things in. And expansive and hyperbolic. So immediately buys into a new belief system without requiring evidence or extensive information. Okay, yep, that's it. We did it. I think that's good enough for today. So thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, let's see. Yeah, that's it. And this is it. We're going into holding patterns in the next reading, which are assumptions, spiritual bypassing and denial, and the shadow, which is absolute certainty. And then we're techniques and exercises. So any comments, of course, I respond to per usual. If there's something you don't want to put in a public comment, direct message me on the Parinama method on Instagram. And yeah, and any interactions, likes and stuff are appreciated, but just being here is more than enough. Thank you. I will see you next time. Bye.